Hi there, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome back to the Nintendo Report. This is a series where we're taking a look at all of Nintendo's intellectual properties, taking a look at them in alphabetical order to see how they're doing. What is their health rating? Last time we covered the letter D, which was pretty daunting, but this time we're covering the letter E, which should be much easier. Yes, I am a master wordsmith. Stupid jokes aside, there was a ton of D games to look at. This time there's not nearly as many E games, but I do think there's a lot of interesting ones to see how they're doing in the world of video games today. So without further ado, welcome to the Nintendo Report. Let's see what's going on with Nintendo games that start with the letter E.
First up we have EarthBound. Also known as Mother in Japan, EarthBound has had quite an interesting history stateside. The first game in the series was almost released on NES as EarthBound, but wound up being cancelled at the last minute thanks to the platform being so far along in its life. But its sequel, Mother 2, did get localized on the Super NES, and just to make things extra confusing, Nintendo went ahead and called it EarthBound. Fun! It's a turn-based RPG that eschews the traditional medieval setting for something a bit more contemporary, and it's got a really weird and wonderful sense of humor to match. It's easily one of Nintendo's most beloved franchises, and its health rating is basically dead. Regardless of how much people love EarthBound today, back at the time of its release, it was almost completely overlooked. The ad campaign was pretty awful, and the game's visuals, while timeless and charming, were looked down on by most players of the day who were obsessed with games having quote-unquote good graphics. Still, Nintendo continued to keep the franchise alive, even going so far as to show off its sequel at trade shows under the title EarthBound 64. This game never came to be, though, at least not in that form, and was eventually moved over to the Game Boy Advance, where it was released in Japan as Mother 3, and never released in North America at all. Mother 3's complete lack of a US release is a point of contention among fans, and one that seemingly will never go away, but the real reason this series is basically dead is because its creator says so. He told the stories he wanted to tell, and that's kinda it. Of course, with Nintendo, it's hard to say anything is ever truly dead, especially when there's potential money to be made. But as of right now, outside of Smash Brothers and fan projects, EarthBound is effectively retired. Next we have Electroplankton. Electroplankton. Here's a great example of Nintendo at its weirdest. It's sort of a music application? It's a DS game that revolves around these little creatures floating around the screen, and you tap to make all sorts of weird sounds. It's honestly completely crazy and kinda brilliant, and its health rating is basically dead. In North America, Electroplankton was only ever made physically available at the Nintendo World Store in New York City, and even there it didn't exactly fly off the shelves. It was then split into a bajillion little parts and released as DSiWare, where I can only assume it didn't fare much better. It's such an extremely niche title. Of course, it did get its own Smash Brothers stage, but I'm pretty sure that just confused people more than anything. In the age where digital downloads are far more prevalent than they were in the DSiWare days, Electroplankton seems like a much better fit, but as it stands now, Nintendo hasn't been motivated to revisit the franchise in any meaningful way since 2006. Next up, we have Elite Beat Agents, which is technically part of a series called Ouendan. Where the Ouendan games were only released in Japan, Elite Beat Agents was never released in Japan. That's at least partially because these rhythm action games feature popular music. As you can imagine, popular music is a very regional thing. Elite Beat Agents was Nintendo's attempt at localizing the Ouendan formula, which is a pretty weird thing when you look at it. At its core, it's a rhythm game where you have to tap and perform motions on the DS touchscreen to the rhythm of the music. What makes these games so bizarre is the premise. Each one is centered around a team of professional cheerleaders who go out into the world to help people overcome their personal problems by cheering them on with the power of dance and popular music. It's completely insane, and its health rating is not so good. Elite Beat Agents was a very successful translation of Ouendan in every way but one: sales. It didn't really perform well, and as such has been the only release in the series. Ouendan isn't faring much better either, with 2007's Osu Tatake Ouendan 2 marking the last new entry in its series. It's such a wild premise though, and one with quite a cult following, that you never really know when it's gonna pop back up. Could be never, could be tomorrow. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Next, let's talk about Endless Ocean. This was a product of the Wii era if there ever was one. It's effectively a scuba diving simulation with some light story elements. You control a diver and take pictures of marine life. It's also known for having an excellent chill soundtrack. It was developed by Arika, whose more recent works include the excellent 3D Classics line on 3DS and Tetris 99 for Nintendo Switch. It's not exactly the kind of game that comes to mind when you think of first-party Nintendo titles, but it's for sure got its fans, and its health rating is great. Endless Ocean got a sequel on the Wii in 2010, but then stayed dormant for 14 years before being revived out of nowhere on Nintendo Switch. Endless Ocean Luminous just came out in 2024, and while early reviews haven't exactly been glowing, the fact that the game exists at all goes to show how much faith Nintendo has in the brand. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we have Eternal Darkness. This GameCube exclusive survival horror psychological thriller started life back in the Nintendo 64 days, but was eventually ported to Nintendo's next generation platform and released during its launch window. It never caught on to the degree of your Resident Evils and Silent Hills, but it did pretty well for itself thanks to the word of mouth it generated as a result of people playing through its extremely memorable sanity effects. Sadly, its health rating is basically dead. See, Nintendo owns this IP, but it was also a Silicon Knights joint, and since they don't exactly exist anymore, it's hard to say for sure what the brand's legal status is. In 2013, several former Silicon Knights staffers tried to launch a crowdfunded sequel called Shadow of the Eternals, but it never got off the ground. This is the kind of game that Nintendo doesn't really do, but seems to have a penchant for funding. Just take a look at Bayonetta or Devil's Third. They also keep renewing the trademark for some reason, so while its chances are slim, it would be foolish to write off Eternal Darkness entirely. Next up, we have Ever Oasis. Grezzo has done some outstanding work for Nintendo over the years, much of which has been on some pretty high-profile releases. They're the team behind the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D remasters on 3DS, Luigi's Mansion on 3DS, Link's Awakening on Switch, and more. So when Nintendo announced the team would be creating a new original IP for 3DS, it garnered a decent amount of attention. Ever Oasis was that game, and, well, its health rating is basically dead. This game just came and went with very little fanfare. Ever Oasis suffered from a problem that hit a lot of 3DS games from that time. It was on 3DS. More specifically, it wasn't on the Switch. The 3DS may have had a huge install base in 2017, but audiences in general seemed more than happy to stop playing on the platform in favor of Nintendo's newest machine. As a result, almost every 3DS project released after 2017 was more or less dead on arrival. It probably didn't help that reviews were somewhat middling, but the game absolutely had its fans, with the overpowering sentiment being that it would have performed considerably better had it been on the Switch. Unfortunately, there hasn't been so much as a peep out of this action RPG being ported to any new platforms, or a follow-up of any kind being in the works. Last but not least, we have the Excite games. Excitebike is one of the absolute all-time NES classics. Everyone knew someone who owned this game back in the day, and everyone spent countless hours creating their own courses and racing their little hearts out in this hit motocross classic. Given the success of the NES original, you'd think its lineage would be a little more straightforward, but the Excite franchise is anything but normal, and its health rating is, well, who knows? Seriously, it's impossible to tell when this series is going to pop up next. It got a sequel in arcades as part of the Nintendo Versus system called Versus Excitebike, which was ported to the Famicom Disk System but never released in North America for some reason. There was also another Japan-only sequel released on the Satellaview for the Super Famicom, which was actually Mario-themed. The series returned to North America in the form of Excitebike 64, which was much more of a realistic motocross situation than the goofy NES Classic, but then disappeared again until the Wii, where the series got 3 unique entries. First was Excite Truck, a 3D racer about trucks, then there was Excitebike World Rally, which was a modern reimagining of the NES Classic, which released exclusively on WiiWare so nobody played it, and then Excitebox Trick Racing, a super fun and weird arcade-style racer featuring transforming robots. It received almost no promotions from Nintendo and was basically dead on arrival at retail upon its release. That was back in 2009, and the series has been quiet ever since, unless you count re-releases. The Versus game was released as part of both Nintendo Switch Online and the Arcade Archives line, and the original game was remade for 3DS as part of the aforementioned Arika 3D Classic series. Excitebike gets referenced all the time, and even though it's been about 15 years since the last original game, Nintendo has absolutely not forgotten about it. We may not know when it'll be back, but there's no question in my mind that it will be.
Well, there you have it, folks. That is the world of Nintendo through the letter E, and there's some not-so-great health ratings going on there. Nintendo could definitely do a better job with some of their E stuff, but they've got some weird things floating around in there. I would love to see Ever Oasis make some sort of get another attempt, right? Grezzo has really earned that chance to get their own original property out there in the world through, especially with the work they've done on the Switch. It's been really, really good. But regardless, I digress. Next time we're going to be taking a look at the letter F, which has Fire Emblem, so we know for sure there's at least one property that starts with F that Nintendo absolutely refuses to stop making tons of games on, because boy did that company love Fire Emblem. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw here today, please follow, comment, like, subscribe, share, and let me know which Nintendo properties that start with the letter E do you want to see make a big comeback when the Nintendo Switch 2 launches sometime this year, right? I'm pretty it's happening this year. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and on behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.